My name is Richard Shebib. I was born in Detroit on August 22nd, 1936. My father is Lebanese. I know little about him because he passed away when I was 9 years old from a heart attack. This is my father. He had heart trouble. From my understanding, the problem he had was a blood clot that was in his arteries. It wasn't a sudden death. We knew that he was ill, and he was in the hospital for 2 years before he actually passed away. So we made a trip down to the hospital and saw him, and he couldn't talk. They had an oxygen mask on him, laying on a bed. And we didn't stay too long with him because he couldn't talk, we couldn't talk to him. But we all said our goodbyes, and he passed away that night. I was 11 at the time he actually died. He was in the hospital for 2 years, so actually, to me, I considered him gone when I was 9 because I didn't have a father after that. And my mother is Syrian. She came from Damascus, Syria. Very gentle personality, but she was a very tough lady. Well, one day when my father passed away, my mother was concerned for us that we were going to worry that we didn't have money to survive. And she showed us savings that she had from years of work when she worked with her brother before she met my dad. And she saved like over $30,000 that she had in savings. And back in 1940, that was a decent amount of money. I came from a family of five of us siblings. My sisters were the oldest. I had 2 older sisters. I had an older brother, and then I had a younger brother. There were 5 of us. I was thinking after we get a bite to eat and I get some gas, we'll go into the city. You were wanting me to talk about my early life, so I figured I'll show you where I lived as a little boy. We lived in a story and a half bungalow. They knocked down my house. It's not here no more.
Well, it used to be where, right here?
Right there.
Right here?
That empty lot.
Hold on. So in between this house
Yeah. We had no
and that
income.
house.
My mother didn't have a job. My oldest sister, Jeanette, had to quit high school and go to work to help provide income for the family. The rest of us went through school to finish, and we got part-time jobs or anything. I had a paper route, and I would contribute whatever monies I made from my paper route to my mother, so that we all contributed to helping us survive those times without any father that provided income, and my mother couldn't work. She didn't have working skills. We had a corner market, yeah. In the early days, my mom and dad operated. My father was the butcher. My mother was the sales lady. She was a good seller. She was good at that. I went with my dad many trips to the Eastern Market to provide produce and products that he would buy down there for the store. But we had to sell that. 2 reasons. One, my father was getting ill. He had a heart attack. And the doctor told him he had to slow down. And he still wanted to work to provide some kind of income. So he sold the store. It was a good time for him to sell it at that time because some company opened up a small market, grocery store, which would have put him out of business anyway.
Grew up with mom and dad in the house. Some of the things that I learned from watching my dad, the biggest thing is probably just his work ethic, his attention to detail, his drive to be successful, not only as in his professional life, but his personal life. I don't think anyone who knows my father can say that they know someone who works any harder than he does.
Growing up, it was very We were disciplined, we were structured, but we had a lot of fun at the same time. My parents were very involved, especially my dad, in a lot of coaching of sports, getting us involved in as many activities so we could find out what it is that we wanted to do and what we wanted to be good at. Our parents encouraged us to find what we like. They didn't push us in any particular direction. Family was extremely important. Holidays were extremely important. Vacations and fun with family was extremely important. So all in all, it was a very good, very structured, very happy childhood growing up.
My dad always coached our teams. I think sports are a great lesson in life in general, anyone who takes sports, and then the way he coached just really exemplified the type of person he was.
It was a good balance. Dad didn't show favoritism to me as his son as a player. If I didn't do right on the field, he would let me know. If I did do right on the field, he didn't overpraise me as his son. He didn't put me in the lead position all the time, the favorite position on the field. He made me earn it just like everybody else. So he treated everybody else fairly and the same.
I had promised Brad that I would give him a penalty kick, and when the opportunity first came up, it happened to be in a scoreless game, and I gave the first penalty kick to one of our strongest players, and that upset him a lot. And he turned on the field and yelled at me, "You promised me." And so there was nothing I could do about it at that point in time. So he was a little upset with me, and so upset that he fired me as his coach. He wanted to go on to another team. So I let him go. I did. I regret that part, but it was done. My wife. I remember working at Ford Motor Company. The way I first encountered with her was walking in from the parking lot into the office. It was in the winter, and I kind of slipped on some ice, and she was there, and she started laughing. She says, "You walk much?" And so we walked into the office together at that point, and we just hooked up. That's how I met her. We were dating. We drove around one day with her parents in the car, and her father was sitting in the back seat. She sat up front with me. And I asked him, I said, "Mr. Gonalek, would you mind, but can I have your blessing to marry your daughter?" And he says, "Well, it's about time you asked me. You've been drinking my beer for 3 years." So he said, "Okay." And that's how I asked. I'm the kind of a guy that won't divorce my wife if my children are young. And she wanted a divorce when Rick was 9 years old. So Bradley would have been 5. She asked me for a divorce, and I said, "Fine, we could have the divorce." And we were in the kitchen talking. And I said, "There's the door." I says, "Anytime you want to go, you can go. But I said, you're not going to take the boys." Well, I knew 2 things. First of all, that's unacceptable. She ain't going to leave the kids. And number 2, the courts wouldn't give me the kids anyway because they were too young. And they would have kept with their mother. But I did present her with that. I said, "You want to go, you can leave. But I'm not going to give up my sons." And so it was on that conversation that we both agreed that we would stay together until the boys were 18 or out of high school, into college, maybe even out of college. If you still want the divorce back in that time, then we can get the divorce.
I see other people whose parents are together still to this day, and sure, that's the ideal. It doesn't always work out that way, but then you see that when things don't work out, you can still make the most of your life after, the unfortunate.
Even after they divorced, he was an important part of her life, even as she moved on, but he was always there. If she needed help, he would go to help. He would call her up. In fact, when my mom died, we went into the house and we're looking at things and went to the answering machine. The last call on her machine was my dad leaving a message to ask her if she wanted to go out to lunch. And so that's the type of person he was. They weren't. He always said that they may not have been married in man's eye, but they will always be married in God's eye. And that's kind of how he was. And so he took those vows and continues to take those vows of marriage and the sacrament of marriage seriously.
And then there's Nancy. Well, Nancy, I've known for a long, long time.
Well, I met him about 50 years ago. He was a good friend of my brother and sister-in-law. And then we got acquainted about 1996.
Because her brother was my best friend for many years. We played golf together, we bowled in bowling leagues together, and we did a lot of activity. We were very, very good friends.
I just seen him maybe once or twice in those years. And then in 1996, we met. He came and had dinner with my sister-in-law and my brother and me for our birthday, because my sister-in-law and my birthday are almost a day apart.
And we've been going together ever since, actually. I think I only dated one or two women before her. But once I started dating her, we stayed together, and we still are.
Before he was married, or before I was married, we were supposed to go on a date, and then I got sick.
So anyway, she canceled the date, and so I never asked her to go out again.
And I told him once we got together again, I said, "Do you remember? How come you never called me back?" I said, we could have been married or something together. He says, we both thought, well, he wouldn't have had his two wonderful sons, and I wouldn't have had my wonderful daughter.
The Christian bookstore was its first of its kind here, and I hosted him here for almost 4 or 5 years. It provided service to not only the Orthodox community, but the Catholic and Protestant community.
And when he opened Pascha Bookstore, I went and started working with him there almost from the beginning, helping him out with different things, eventually the website and all different aspects of the store. It seemed like a good idea, something unique, challenge. He had researched it, going out west to research one that actually existed already, did a lot of the background work, and it seemed like quite an undertaking, but he always persisted with it.
We drove around together, looked at bookstores and did things, and when he started it, I helped him out a little bit, putting the books in the shelves and stuff like that.
It was a newly opened store, and there was a lady, Joanne Osfor, the manager, and who I later learned was the owner, Richard Shebib. And I was his second customer in the store.
For a period of time, Pascha was in our banquet and conference center in Livonia, and I loved it because it gave all kinds of individuals from various backgrounds an introduction to the ancient Church of the East.
My first meeting with Richard Shebib was through his bookstore. Unlike some people you meet, it takes a while for them to warm up to you. It takes a while for them to feel connected to you. And as far as Richard was concerned, it was just immediate.
One of the positive benefits that Pascha Books and Gifts gave us while it was still in operation was the opportunity to introduce people who would otherwise not know anything about the Orthodox tradition, the Eastern Christian patrimony at all. And it was a wonderful means of evangelization, a very practical one in the marketplace where people actually live. The trouble is today, of course, people tend to go online, so you lose this kind of a human relationship with another person who's committed to the faith. And so I thought that was a wonderful ministry while it was there to evangelize in a community where people actually lived and worked. And
Little did I realize that one day I would become Orthodox. But it was through meeting with Richard, talking with him.
The bookstore itself was an extension of his faith in Jesus Christ.
He does what he does best, being the head ushers. He helped me with organizing the candles. He organized the tray collection, the offering, and he's one of the hardest working men that I have met in my church. Him and I are the first one to be in church on Sunday before anyone comes, and sometimes he beat me to it.
I didn't realize the agreement until much later on in life. We were raised Catholic, so we celebrated the traditional Christian holidays in the traditional way, Christmas, Easter, things like that. It wasn't until later in life that I realized that Dad had sort of put aside the Orthodox side of his life, for the good of the happiness of his wife and the happiness of that was a decision that they made. I know we were baptized Byzantine Catholic, but the Byzantine part of it was not. It really wasn't until my 30s that I realized how important that was to him. So it made me kind of, in a way, appreciate him even more, that he was willing to put what is clearly an extremely important part of his life that he takes seriously, and kind of put it on the back burner because it meant being a good father, it meant being a good husband in the situation that he was in. Now that I see the connection he has with his church and the connection he has with his faith, it only makes me respect him even more. It makes me, learn from him that side of faith and things that I didn't know before growing up.
The leaders began to retire and stop. Finally, the foundation or the council went down to a point where they were going to close it. And there was about 3 or 4 people that said they didn't want to close it. They'd like to revive it and get to improve upon it. And so I took on the presidency of it at that time, the first time I was president of the council, to try to help revive it and bring it back to its heyday, as it were. I worked at that for 5 years, rebuilding the council. And then when I did leave it, I left it only because I had opened up a foundation. To get grants, I had actually signed on to a night class learning to write grants. And eventually the woman who was teaching became a part of us and wrote grants for us, a number of them. We paid her for doing this, and we got some at least professional care in trying to get the grant money. To this date, we still never got a grant. I went to this school, Wilbur Wright, because it was a trade school. And I wanted to learn a trade that I could get a job with when I graduated. And I studied there designing and drafting. And that was my job when I left and went into the corporate world. At Ford Motor Company, I worked at Ford for 40 years as a designer. I went to Wilbur Wright. I went to Ford Motor Company. And I had a military leave of absence to go into the service for 2 years. So I went into the service, did my service time, because back in those days we were drafted into the service. And when I came back, my job was still available for me when I returned because I went into military service. All right, I went into the service in February '56, and it was drafted at the time, so it was a 2-year service time. Did my basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I spent the rest of my service time in El Paso, Texas at Fort Bliss. I was a designer there, so I worked in corporate headquarters, designing training aids because Fort Bliss was a training center, and I made training aids for the classes, for the instructors. I was able to use my designing skills, my drafting skills in the service. When you go into the service, they ask you what you did professionally, and they tried to always marry your professional job to jobs in the service so that you can complement the service work. And so I worked in what they called battalion headquarters at that time at a training unit in El Paso at Fort Bliss. Say something meaningful. I have nothing profound to say except turn that camera off. All right, thanks guys. We'll talk to you next week.
Well, I kind of thought he was biting off more than he could chew because it was obvious he didn't know what was involved with creating and putting on a weekly radio program. He came up to me one afternoon downstairs in the coffee social after church, and we began to talk about who I was because I think I was a stranger. And in passing, I happened to mention that I used to work with the Antiochian Christian Orthodox Radio Network based out of Beaumont, Texas many years ago. And the next thing you know, he invited me to lunch, and we started talking about the Detroit's own Orthodox radio that he wanted to start. At the time, he was the president of the Council of Orthodox Christian Churches of Metropolitan Detroit, and as it would happen, he had been approached some weeks before by two of the metropolitan archbishops in our area about starting a new radio program just for the Council of Orthodox Christian Churches. So in a way, I guess our meeting was probably fortuitous because I'd had some experience in radio and he had the mandate to do it, so one thing led to another, so here we are.
The thing about Richard is that he's a curious person. He's very curious. And he's the type of person, because of his background being in engineering, it's always like, how do we come up with solutions? How do we make this thing work? And I think anything that Richard is presented with, he wants to figure it out, how it works, the inner workings of it, you know, the infrastructure, what have you. And I've seen that time and time again, things that Richard didn't know anything about, even with the radio station, didn't know anything about. He learned it. He learned it, and he pushed himself until he really fully understand what it was about.
The radio program is a growing media in our midst. And again, without his effort, there would not be a radio program.
Detroit's own Orthodox Radio proclaims the Orthodox Christian faith and holy tradition by connecting our communities and faithful, educating on historic and modern-day subjects, and engaging the listening public across the metropolitan region and beyond.
What if somebody like St. Paul, for example, had access to a radio station? I mean, think about that. What if the ancient Christians had access to publishing a newspaper? What if they had the mass media that we have today? Kind of makes you wonder, just would Christianity be where it is today, or would it be much larger? I know one thing, if St. Paul were sitting here instead of me, I'm sure we'd probably have a lot more listeners than we have.
Our diligent staff that works each week to produce this program includes John Lazar, our music segment producer and interviewer, Father Dmitry Vincent, segment producer and priest interviewer, Karen R. Todorov, story segment producer and interviewer, Richard Shebib, our roving reporter, and of course, myself, Jim Bedeen, your narrator and program editor.
So now the question is what if? Well, that's been answered. The what if is here. We have mass media in the form of this radio program. So if you would like to listen to us, by all means, tune in every Sunday afternoon between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. on AM 690 and listen to Detroit's own Orthodox Radio. And if you would like to learn more about us, by all means, check us out on our website at www.doorradio.org. That's www.doorradio.org.
I didn't know if he was going to shoot the video himself because, you know, he's not too mechanical.
Got an email one day with a link, hey, look at this. So it kind of took me by surprise. I didn't really know he was getting into that. It was kind of a surprise because, you know, I don't mean to sound bad, but at his age, you know, somebody taking on, you know, a technological thing like that, it's surprising sometimes to most of us.
How I know these things start to happen is usually I'll get a phone call and it'll be, hey Rick, what do you know about X? And this time it was, what do you know about video editing? What do you know about cameras? What do you know? And I'm like, not a lot. And then, so the next question would be why? And so you kind of go over the questions like that. And I help him out when I can with Online Dad, as smart as he is, and he's one of the smartest people I know, and not afraid to do anything. I don't know if I know a guy who's less technically savvy initially than my father.
I was quite impressed by some of the videos he showed me on YouTube. Because of the quality of the work was so great, it was quality. It was absolute quality. And then when I realized he did the work, I was just even more intrigued just to see more videos, not even so much about the subject matter, I hate to say, but just of the quality of the work.
Yeah, he has a lot of vision for the Orthodox Church. He's a very idealistic man.
We supported a local ministry that was operated by a young man, Jerome Fisher.
You don't have to go down the alley if you don't want to, but I will walk down the alley to there's tents over here, Father. You can come with me. Like there's a person in that tent right there.
What do I do here? Oh, there it is. Okay.
Sir, would you like a bag of food? Okay. Got some water in there as well. Have a blessed day. Hello, we're going to leave a lunch right outside the door of your tent. So it's going to be right outside the door of your tent by this pillow.
Not too many out this morning.
Yeah, we'll see the greater number as we go in towards the train area.
We're more blessed to give than to receive. So we're blessed. Jerome's a part of our community and we serve our neighbors every week. And his particular ministry is extending that reach to a lot of our neighbors that we don't see on a weekly basis.
He loves his papa. Hey. How's it going? You look fantastic as always.
So do you.
Today we're celebrating my dad's 80th birthday. We've been planning this event for months, but it really became into focus probably the last 2 weeks. His reaction will be complete surprise. Dad's a smart guy, but I don't think he knows this one's coming. Surprise! Happy birthday, dear Papa. Happy birthday to you. Stolat, stolat, nie żyje nam. Stolat, stolat, nie żyje nam. Stolat, stolat, nie żyje nam. Nie żyje nam. Woo! Happy birthday.
All right, you ready? Whoa, everybody, all kids.
1, 2, 3.
I've been very blessed through all my life. And right now, the biggest blessing I have are 2 sons that I'm extremely proud of. They're grown adults now. They each have their own career. One is a physical therapist. He manages a business that where he works. My other son is a pilot. He's a professional pilot now. He served as a pilot in the Air Force for 20 years. I'm very proud of both of them, and they're good friends. They live close together and they see each other quite often, which is a blessing to me to know that when I go, they're going to still be friends. My oldest boy has 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. They're great kids, all of them. They're my legacy. These are the kids that are following me, and they're going to grow up. So I know that my life was not in vain, and it's been a good life. And I've been very blessed all my life. I can't be happier and more satisfied.